minutes, so I'm gonna try to do that. Okay, so yeah, so a lot of people don't realize, but for the typical manufactured product, most of the value that the company like an HP or Procter and Gamble sells to you is just simply value that's bought from suppliers and is kind of passing on to you. You know, the direct manufacturing costs, labor, and things like that are a much smaller piece of the pie. So we can really think about companies today as companies that are kind of sourcing value and passing that on. And of course, the more they do, that's supply chain. They're just becoming more and more dependent on the supply chain. That portion grows every year. Um, so what do we mean when we say supply chain? There's all kinds of different pictures of supply chain. I think a lot of them like these are kind of goofy, but the basic idea is this chain metaphor, right? That we always hear about. Start with raw material and kind of move through to consumers or other end users. But really, that chain metaphor isn't really the greatest metaphor in the world. In fact, it's not a very good one. Companies really exist in supply networks. And if we think about, let's just say this is our company here in the middle, right? We've got lots of suppliers, like these green suppliers here. We would consider these tier 1 suppliers because they supply us directly. But then those suppliers have suppliers too, right? And 15 years ago, if you asked most companies about their suppliers, they would have looked at you kind of funny, but that doesn't happen anymore either. So, we've got these second tier suppliers that supply our suppliers, and then third tier suppliers that supply the suppliers, and so on. If you think about it, if you've only got 10 suppliers, which isn't very many, and each one of them has suppliers, that's 100 companies that you depend on, right? And if each one of them has, a tier deeper, 10 suppliers, that's 1,000 suppliers all of a sudden that you depend on. So it becomes very complicated. And some of these suppliers aren't really independent. Like down here in the lower left-hand corner, we've got this supplier, and they're a third tier supplier to this supplier who supplies this supplier who supplies me. But look, they're also a supplier to this other supplier. I may think these two green suppliers are independent, but they're really not, because they both depend on this guy down here. So it's very complex, and we haven't even talked about things like the logistics, the transportation, the information flows, the financial flows, and so on. Oh, and here we've got a supplier who supplies us, but he also supplies our customers. So it gets pretty interesting and pretty complex pretty quickly. A lot more than most of us realize, because it works pretty great most of the time. Supply chain resilience involves identifying, managing, and responding to disruptions in that, let's just call it a supply chain, even though it's really not. And those disruptions vary in frequency and in magnitude and how easy it is to detect them. Barb can talk a little bit about detectability for sure. I think some of the concerns she's got. And again, most of the time as consumers, we don't notice these things, but occasionally we do. But folks are working on these things all the time. And I just wanted to toss out another term, humanitarian logistics, which is similar but different. It refers to a supply chain's efforts to respond to an adverse event in an area that it serves. So Doctors Without Borders setting up a supply chain, or Walmart, responding to the Katrina disaster, or Cities for Good right here in Boise that Chris can talk about for a minute, doing things here in Boise to respond to the COVID crisis here in town. Okay, so that's everything you need to know about supply chain in 3 or 4 minutes. You'll learn a lot more here when we start to hear from our panelists. I'm going to go ahead and introduce the panelists. Or actually, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to ask the panelists to introduce themselves. So why don't we start with Rick? I asked Rick to join the panel, or Carson and I asked Rick, because we feel like what Micron is doing is really state of the art, and they've been doing it for a long time. So go ahead, Rick, just tell us for a minute or so what about you and about your kind of relationship to supply chain resilience.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. My name is Rick Freeman. I am based in California. I've worked for Micron for, I think, 16 years in January, all of it in global procurement and supply chain. For the last 5 years or so, I've been helped leading the Micron's global supply risk and resilience team. And our job is to manage inbound supply and monitor for events, and which is kind of reactionary, and then also figure out ways to be more proactive and predictive for events, which some you can't do, but quite a few you can, and to manage these things and figure out mitigation strategies for Micron, so that we we can continue to provide goods and materials for consumers or the other companies that we supply to that are pretty prevalent in all of our technology today. So and Tom was talking about the complexity of supply chain, and it's tremendously complex, right? When we have 8,000 active suppliers today, and each of those have between 2 to 100 of key suppliers that they use, this neural network becomes just tremendously large. So one of the things that we talk a lot about in Micron now is data, right? Big data, right? Data scientists, which I know from my past and education, but now bringing data scientists and Micron using terms like neural network, which my degree is actually in psychology, so I love it. But it's it's exciting. We're doing a lot of exciting things, so maybe we'll touch on that a little bit as we go along. So thanks, Tom.
Okay, thank you. Chris Kamori runs Kin Restaurants and is also involved in Cities for Good. And Micron has a super complex and global supply chain, and Kin has really taken 180-degree approach to that. And it's another way to deal with supply chain risk, which is by crafting a supply chain that's super local and super embedded in the community. So, Chris, can you tell us a little bit more about you and Kin and your relationship to supply chain?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Chris Komori, chef and co-owner of Kin Restaurant in Boise, downtown. We are a pretty tiny restaurant. We do a tasting menu, so a coursed out set menu that we change every 4 or 5 weeks. We also have a cocktail bar that sort of dances around, and it's a little more traditional bar. During the pandemic, we actually were supposed to open in March of 2020. We didn't do that exactly, but we did hire staff, and then we had to furlough them. And due to that, we were a little concerned about a few things. Restaurant workers, a gap in food for people, and actually supporting our local farms, because we were worried that if the restaurants all go down, the farmers won't have anyone to sell to. So we helped found a nonprofit called City of Good, which has now grown exponentially, and we're really proud of it. But initially, we were getting restaurant workers back into kitchens safely and getting weekend meal kits out to kids of the Boise School District that needed food outside of the Monday through Friday round. So we've learned supply chain issues from both what we have to purchase, but I've been seeing it a little bit in now we are a distributor of food out. It used to be that everyone just comes to the restaurant and eats here, so we don't have to worry about getting it out like that. But as this world has changed, we do a lot more delivery and takeout and things like that, and it's on a much smaller scale. But it's a lot of labor. I would say in our pie chart, labor is our highest cost of good nowadays, whereas it wasn't always that case. But we're small, and we are the other side of it, but we can show a little nimble adaptability because of that.
So what percentage of your inbound ingredient flow comes from, say, like 100 miles radius?
We haven't been able to track it precisely, but it's probably around 60% in the winter, and it goes up to probably about 80-85% in the summer.
Okay. So quite the opposite from Rick and his world. Barb, with Idaho National Labs, Barb Siciliano, could you tell us a little bit about who you are and your relationship to supply chain resilience?
Sure, yeah. So hello, everyone. I'm Barbara Siciliano, and I am coming to you from Eastern Idaho, where I work for Idaho National Lab. It's our nation's only nuclear energy lab, and the mission of Idaho National Lab also involves changing the world's energy future and securing our critical infrastructure in the nation. So quite a big national lab. There's about 6,000 employees, and the supply chain for Idaho National Lab, sitting here in Eastern Idaho, is a very complex network, mostly in need of facilitating the supply chain, because Eastern Idaho's industrial development base is lacking in that regard for such a big lab. My background is in intelligence. So what Idaho National Lab hired me to do was to take a look at risk evaluation within the supply chain. And I would just say that I come from this from a preventative perspective, kind of like Rick is doing now as well. Looking at how do we get in front of that risk? How do we evaluate the risk of a supply chain disruption, whether it comes from an industry type business disruption, from a national security disruption, or however we look at whatever happens to the supply chain. How do we make ourselves, as you all say, more resilient to those problems? How do we shore up our supply chain from these obvious risks that are out there? So that's where I come from, and I can't wait to have this discussion.
Thank you. Okay, and last but not least, we've got one of the, I would say, foremost academics working in this area of supply chain resilience with us today, Stephen Carnevale from RIT. So Stephen, again, if you could just tell us a little bit about who you are and a little bit about your relationship to resilience.
With an introduction like that, I really can't throw up on my shoes, can I? At least if I do, it'll go down really hard. Thanks, Tom. Yeah, so Stephen Carnevale, I'm a professor of supply chain management at the Rochester Institute of Technology. You could say a little bit towards Eastern Idaho, except really far east. My relationship to supply chain risk management and resilience is I study it basically for a living. I come at it from multiple different perspectives. Initially, I came at it from mathematical modeling perspective. So analyzing the network, predicting how disruptions would propagate and spread, and the impact that would have, and correctly, as Tom identified, the way it would compound because of that structure and that complexity. Recently, I've been shifting more towards things that I think supply chain management folks would consider unconventional, things like cybersecurity, intellectual property, and intentional deception and theft around supply chain. So try to get my head around it every day, and I'm always learning something new. But yeah, that's kind of how I approach risk management. Looking forward to chatting about it with everybody.
Okay, thanks everybody. So I guess I've got about a half a dozen questions for you guys that we'll try to cover in about the next 30 minutes or so, and then we'll open it up for questions for the last 15 minutes or so, assuming we've got time. So question for everybody: what do you see as the greatest threat, one or two threats to the supply chains that you're engaged with? Rick, can we start with you?
That's a good question. I think the thing that is on my mind recently is definitely cybersecurity. All it takes is one small supplier that it isn't prepared, that can go down, that could wind up impacting Micron as a whole. Cybersecurity is a big one. I think there's some of the other kind of big risks we're looking for is regulatory, which is there's lots of regulations that happen all the time, and those regulations could have far-reaching impacts to Micron. So regulatory risks are a big one. Some of the normal ones like geographic, macroeconomic, natural disasters, those things we monitor and have a pretty good handle on. So it's usually kind of some of the unknown ones. Environmental is becoming a big increasing one, increasing sea levels. If we have suppliers that are in a low floodplain, right, what's going to happen? So there's quite a few things for us to be thinking about, but those are a couple of the bigger ones on our mind lately.
Okay, thanks, Chris.
Yeah, I mean, I guess dealing with food and a perishable product. One that's maybe more current are just the labor shortages everywhere. It's not just within our restaurant and other restaurants. It's from the farms. It's from the distributors. They're all short, and so the delivery chain of that is tighter, the lead time is longer, things like that. But I would say in general, in the future, it is climate change. We are in somewhat of a dry climate, right? And water is becoming an issue. The growing seasons are getting all fluctuated. I'm not sure how many people are in Boise, but we had all the orchards with blossoms get snow on them, and it potentially is going to damage the entire cherry apple or plum crop for the year. And that's a weird thing that you don't normally see. It's also, in addition to climate change, some of it is maybe it's a egg land, so preserving agricultural land. We've seen the development of neighborhoods and whatnot all through the valley, and a lot of that is actually really good soil to grow the food to support to all these people. So there's a lot of talks about that, and those are kind of longer term threats.
Yeah, that plays into our food security right here in the valley. Yeah, Barb.
Yeah, so when I was thinking about this question, Tom, I was really wanted to make the point that for my risk analysts, that I really asked them to keep an open aperture and look at risk from the perspective of the threats are anything that will potentially disrupt our mission and our operations at the lab. And since the lab is doing research and development on nuclear energy and nuclear energy fuels, we have an extensive supply chain that's out there, right? A lot of it is physical, but of course we are absolutely concerned about the software supply chain. We have a number of operations, large scale operations that have a lot of OT involved in their operational structure, operational technologies, connecting the virtual world to the physical functional world. And for Idaho National Lab, these industrial control systems are a real point of vulnerability, as it is for the rest of the world. Frankly, if anyone's had the discussion about the Internet of Things, they'll know what this means exactly, is that we are all virtual these days and can be disrupted or attacked on those surfaces much easier than we could many years ago. So, but I would say, just as perhaps one other unique thing that Idaho National Lab has to worry about from the perspective of the supply chain is that we run into a single threaded problem. We have suppliers for our unique research requirements that are single threaded. And that means that if anything happened to that particular supplier, whether it's just normal shutdowns, businesses, if they had a fire in their factory, any of those things that could happen, we would be really out of luck because we don't have plan B in place, because frankly, the supplier for this particular thing is not available in this area, except for with this one single threaded supplier. So we're trying to solve the issue of mapping out our single threaded suppliers and trying to figure out how to shore up that problem.
You're muted.
Tom, you might be on mute.
Somebody muted me there. Okay, maybe I muted myself. Who knows? Interesting problem. This sole supplier versus multiple supplier, and what do you do if you're kind of stuck with sole suppliers? Absolutely, got all your eggs in one basket. So, Stephen, can you talk to us a little bit about, maybe more in general, what you're seeing as the biggest threats or the looming threats?
Yeah. So the way I frame it is there's a split. There's endogenous and then there's exogenous. So there's stuff that happens internal to the supply chain and the supply network, and then there's stuff happens external to the supply chain and the supply network. And in both cases, some stuff is obvious, right? Natural disasters, geopolitical risk, labor strike. I mean, we all know about this. There's nothing novel in me telling you that, watch out for hurricanes that might disrupt product flow. But when you consider the impact that dependence and complexity breed in these new supply chains or the structures that we have, it gets really interesting. So, if you take, for example, a lot of tech focused things get outsourced these days. So a tier one supplier, let's say they're deploying a new ERP system or something like that. And then you think about really how much of it they're actually outsourcing. So now I'm talking about if I'm the focal company, I'm talking about my tier two supplier, my supplier. That is a vulnerability if there's security that's not in place, right? So this is both an internal issue and an external issue. And so so that situation, I would worry about things like cybersecurity, malicious code. I would worry about processes that could get stolen, because as you look at the supply chain that's become a network, if I'm having somebody deploy my ERP system, it could be Oracle, it could be SAP, whomever, but there's probably a lot in common with those tier 2 suppliers that maybe my competitors are also using. So now there's issues related to intellectual property spillover and theft. So where I'm seeing the biggest threats, and a number of different companies that I've talked to have faced these problems as well, it's all on the data security, information security related threats. And that's kind of broadly defined, because it could be something as pernicious as stealing a trade secret, or it could be something as innocuous as someone clicked on an email that they shouldn't have, right? So there's that kind of stuff. So on the internal side of things, it's a lack of training around what constitutes risk, which in and of itself breeds a larger likelihood of a disruption. And on the external side of things, it's like, how do we fortify our defenses everywhere for these threats? Because as Barb mentioned, the IoT and the connectivity, I mean, I could have an interface to an ERP system running on my cell phone, and if someone goes in the back door and taps into my network, then it's like that old Bush's baked beans commercial where he kept the recipe in the back of the safe. It's like, we need to do that now. We need to get papyrus and put it inside of a. So anyway, that's the way I would frame it. I think the largest is information security related concerns, and then the second probably is just lack of training around what risk management and what a disruption actually is.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so let's talk about mitigating, or if not mitigating, creating resilience by prevention, right? So could you tell us about maybe one major initiative or business practice that your company uses to deal with the kind of threats we've been talking about? Let's just go ahead and keep going around the horn. So Rick?
I mean, there's a lot, right? There's the standard toolbox of mitigations you have, which is, increase your inventory. So from a manufacturing company, right? Increasing your inventory, putting long-term contracts in place, securing capacity, things like that. I think all of these things are ways to mitigate a risk and try and put things in place so you avoid a risk. I think where the tech industry is going now is trying to get ahead of that. So if you think of it like a triangle, right? You've got reactive, which is, monitoring for events and what do you do with the problem. And then what we're focused on is a couple other things is predictive. How can you get ahead of those events? So those risks, if they do happen, you already have a toolbox of mitigations that have already been in place, but how do you predict it? And some of the things you can predict are, during COVID, when COVID rates are kind of going up and down, you could predict ahead of time when countries or cities would kind of close up. And if you can predict ahead of time, then you can figure out, how do I avoid those cities either get materials out or get shipments in before, pulling in shipments or pulling things out. So I think predictive, and then the other kind of that pillar of that triangle for us is, building out scenarios, what if scenarios. But as far as mitigations, we think of mitigations often as things like, buy more stuff, or put in long-term contracts, or find a second source for your single source suppliers, which are all kind of great, but those are industry norms, right? So we consider predictive as a mitigation strategy. How do you get ahead of it? So when that event does happen, either you've already mitigated ahead of time, or it's a non-issue, and then you let your competitors struggle through it when you've already seen it and have been able to mitigate it before it even happens. So I think that's a lot in the tech industry. That's a lot of the focus, is how do you get ahead of that kind of thing.
Could I ask you to talk about Resilink for a minute?
Sure. Yeah, Resilink is a tool. It's a web-based interface, third-party tool that provides mapping of your supply chain. So if you think about earlier, we're talking about, these supply chains are just tremendously complex. And how do you see it? You can't just expect procurement folks, when we have hundreds of them, to know their supply chain, and we just hope that everything goes good. So what Resilink offers is a process and a tool where you load in information. Here's my suppliers, here's the parts, and then they go out and work with the suppliers to map where all these parts are coming from. And if parts move, they can update it. So you can kind of get into a system. And I was talking earlier about, big data. You need to get your data into some kind of system so that you can manage it. You can take that and marry that with your own internal ERP data, in a data lake, and then you can start using some, AI to analyze it and start understanding when there's impacts. So ResLink is a great tool. We've been using it for about 5 years, I think, at Micron, or maybe more now, where we have hundreds of suppliers mapped and almost 20,000 parts, which is a drop in the bucket for the number of parts that Micron buys. But if you look at all the important parts, it allows us to have this visual, not just a visualization, but then we can see these risk things. And then when an event happens, like a hurricane in Taiwan, which we're coming up on hurricane season in a couple of months, when there's an event, we can quickly see these are all the parts that are critical. Here's all the suppliers that are within that area. And then systemically, let's go out and ask the supplier, are you impacted or not? If you are, kind of how much time? We can work individually when we get those messages back, but it means that we don't have to have people all over the world picking up the phone, right? That's the old way, right? You pick up, where are you? Okay, there's a typhoon, right? And you got all these guys panicking. Well, if they can come in the morning and see, okay, 80% of the suppliers have responded, they're not impacted. Now you can use ResLink to just go after those ones that say they are impacted or they haven't responded yet. So it's getting systems and getting that information out of the procurement people's heads and let them be more strategic and just get that data into a system so you can manage it. Data, man. If you're in supply chain, or if you're thinking about getting into supply chain, or you're in the process of learning about supply chain, man, definitely put some courses on big data. I just can't encourage that enough. It's really where the future in large manufacturing is going is big data. You gotta be able to see it and then deal with it.
Yeah, I'll put in a plug. We are steering a lot of our supply chain majors into our big data program, which we also post in our department here at BSU.
Thank you.
Chris. Yeah, major initiative or any initiative. Talk about contract growing, for example, one of my favorite topics, right?
Yeah.
To deal with risk or mitigate risk.
For us, again, even as far as restaurants supply chain, we are kind of a unique place because of our size and our model. Our model, even before supply chain issues for us, we change our menu all the time. We change our dishes. We are constantly in like a creative mode. Part of that is because that's the product that we are good at creating, but also it's fun for us. What we've noticed within a lot of this is that our nimbleness in terms of that is actually a huge benefit for us. Just to compare to a restaurant that would maybe have a static menu, we witness them, all the recipes are based on certain specific brands of a type of flour or type of oil or something like that. When that doesn't show up, they have quality control issues. For us, it's like if a product isn't going to be around growing season or just availability, we just change the dish. So we can do that because we are really small, and also because we have really good contact with our farmers. And one of the reasons why we do like the local scene is not just for the benefit to the community and to the environment, but it's kind of like it's reducing the chain down. It's reducing the links. We're much more direct now. And in fact, we grow our own stuff and we forage our own things in the foothills and things like that. So it's a hard thing to scale, but again, our model is not really based on that. It's about diversifying and things like that. And then it's also teaching restaurants how to use these farms, and it's teaching farmers how to learn from other farmers. And we're now kind of, our job within the distribution, within the chain, is to educate, or at least to like get people into the right positions to educate each other. The contract farming that Tom mentioned, we worked with Tom and BSU with a local farm group called Global Gardens, and it's a bunch of refugee farms. They're kind of a collective that they have varying levels of expertise in farming, and definitely to this climate and to this market. So we wanted to sort of help them talk about what they could sell here and what restaurants would be looking for. And in doing so, we kind of created a little deal where if we were looking for certain products, like a specific type of pepper that we geek out a lot, it's called a habanada. It basically looks and tastes like a habanero, but it doesn't have any of the capsaicin heat to it. So it's really cool, but we can't find anyone to grow it here, even though we do know it will grow well. So we contracted them and just said, we guarantee that we will buy it all because we have preservation methods around it. And so for us, I think that is probably something that we will start to do more often. because we get a unique product, we help the farm, and we're at least a little bit more guaranteed that that's going to come our way.
Yeah, Rick mentioned long-term contracting too, and even as a small company, you're really doing a lot of things to actively manage your supply chain instead of just taking what the chain sort of brings to you. Okay, Barb, different perspective. Could you talk about one or two major initiatives that you've got going on to deal with the type of risks we've been talking about?
First of all, I want to say that I didn't realize I would have things in common with a restaurant owner.
Right.
But it actually turns out that the mitigating strategies for the habanero pepper are similar to the mitigating strategies that you would use to develop more industry specific enterprises in your nearby supply chain. And the lab that I work at has a major effort to try and do that for various widgets and parts and pieces. And so it's actually a kind of interesting, frankly, effect of what we've been through in the last couple of years is that we're really reevaluating and maybe bringing back in some areas, not all areas, but some areas we're bringing back manufacturing of certain things that we didn't do before. I think that's something that a lot of people have probably read about, but that's happening, and I think it's happening in the agricultural areas as well. But back to the initiatives, I can just quickly say, because I know we have other questions, but what Rick is doing is very similar to what INL is doing, in the sense that we are looking at the way and reevaluating the way we look at our data and aggregating it in, I think, more comprehensive ways than we did before. So what I'm doing now as a specific program, which is being initiated in the last 2 years, is pulling up the supply chain risk management, the proactive side that Rick referred to, pulling it up to a higher level in the organization and doing it on a comprehensive basis. And then I would also say, because supply chain analysis was happening in various silos throughout the organization, people had good practices. Those who were primarily looking at quality control might have been doing a little bit of supply chain risk, but it was never done in a comprehensive way. And then I would just add that we are also really making use of the analytical standards that, and this sort of frankly dates back to my intelligence background, because the analysis is generally, I would say, analogous to what intelligence collection in the open source arena is doing right now. If any of you read about how we're manipulating the open source information these days, how we're collecting it, what are we looking at? Those elements of information collection are happening in the government right now. And I believe pushing that down to industry and saying, you can do this too. You can look at our open source data and make risk evaluations that are such a high and standard and a good quality risk evaluation that it's almost akin to what we would do for the government writ large. And while I wouldn't advocate that every business, sort of open up their own business intelligence office, but it's a little bit like that, right? You would do it specifically for your own supply chain, and it would be very narrowly focused, ruthlessly focused on what it is that you're worried about. But we're developing that for our own risk evaluation, and we're owning it, right? We're not outsourcing it. So if that makes sense, I think that adds a little bit to what Rick was saying, but it's similar to what he's doing.
Definitely. It sounds like that it's something that could be outsourced, or there may be companies in that space. Maybe the vendor that Rick and his folks work with are in that space, because that's pretty high level.
Well, there's
right?
there's a crescendo of companies getting into this business, and certainly that what might make sense for some operations to just contract that out. But I have a little bit of a pet peeve about that, because I feel like if you're trying to evaluate and mitigate risk, then why would you outsource it? So it's like you're creating just another supply chain of your risk. So to me, there's like a logical like,
Yeah.
you know, why do I want to do that? You know, my effort is to sort of pull that risk in, make sure we all know what it is and we know what we're looking at, and then we can make intelligent decisions, as opposed to just letting a company sort of tell me if I'm in the red or the green, you know, without anybody really knowing why. So anyway, that's a little bit of my own pet peeve.
I'd say it's a good perspective. Thank you. Stephen, tell us a little, a little bit about what you're seeing in terms of major initiatives, new initiatives.
Yeah, so the digitization trend has been pretty impressive, if not vocal, over the past couple of years. And some of it's complete hogwash, but a lot of it is really interesting. And the one thing that's really piqued my interest is the concept of a digital twin. And by the way, before I forget, Resilink is tremendous. A colleague of mine and I are actually doing some work with their data, and it's a fabulous, comprehensive suite of information. Also, I do want to try Habanada if I ever get the chance. But the digital twin, this is basically the most realistic way to do what if scenario planning, right? So if you essentially take your entire supply chain in as much as you know what it looks like, and you have a digital version of it. So everything that we talked about before that I mentioned in terms of measuring the downstream propagation and how things will spread inevitably, and the way in which that'll come back, if at all, how it'll impact certain suppliers, where there's critical points within the network. You can run multiple different simulations and systematically examine all these different parts of the supply chain. You can do it with a combination of artificial intelligence and machine learning type models. You can also do it with really targeted questions that you might have as a business practice. So that's one thing that I think is making a big splash in a good way. I mean, it's kind of laborious, honestly, to think about initially, and it's not necessarily, you know, something you could spin up tomorrow, but with planning, it's a really good thing. The other thing I think I've been seeing is, and it's been kind of nice, because the way that we look at risk management and supply chains, the way we've categorized it, there's detection, there's mitigation, and then there's recovery. Detection is everything you put into place to figure out what might happen and find those threats before they come in. Mitigation is you realize something's going to happen, you're not perfect, so how do you kind of buttress yourself against it to protect, at least to minimize the damage? And then from a recovery standpoint, what do you do to get back to a pre-disruption state? And everything that's been discussed, I won't be redundant, but everything that's been discussed can fall into one of these three brackets, and together, you know, provides a comprehensive outlook on what risk management is. So those are the things that I've been seeing. And it's in some ways, the double-edged sword of COVID has been, it exposed kind of the thin edge that we were on in many parts of the supply chains globally with respect to procurement, inventory, single sourcing. But in many ways too, it showed the resilience of various aspects of the supply chain, and it's uncovered a need to have these conversations. So I think I kind of got a little off topic, but I hope we steered it back to where we're supposed to be.
Great, thanks. So we just have another couple of minutes, but this, especially being the Hazards and Climate Change Resilience Institute, I wanted to talk just a little bit more about climate change. I know a couple folks touched on it, but with the changing climate, what's the biggest climate-related development that's affecting your industry? And if you have an additional second, maybe how are you adopting? Rick, we'll go ahead and start with you.
Okay. For us, it's water, right? Which when you're making semiconductors, it takes just an ungodly amount of water, and you can recycle that water and reuse that water over and over and over. But there's a lot of situations where that water gets contaminated in some way and you can't reuse it. You can try and treat it, but it just takes a tremendous amount of water. And if we think about, you know, climate change, you know, I'm in California, right? And even in Boise, right? There's droughts, right? And more droughts. And you're talking, you know, you've got this on one hand, but then you also have, you know, Congress talking about the CHIPS Act and trying to give, you know, billions of dollars to semiconductor companies to build fabs in the United States. And where can you build them? I mean, Arizona has a ton of them, and Arizona has no water. And so you're going to be looking at, you know, Intel and putting one in, I think, Iowa or Ohio, right? They're going to build one over there. because there's water. You got to have water. And Taiwan recently, this last winter, area was struggling with the amount of water they had, and there's a ton of wafer fabs to make semiconductors in Taiwan, just a huge amount of them, and they use water. So not having fresh water is a giant impact, and the mitigation strategies that are not simple, right? You can put all the long-term contracts in place you want, but you can't usually buy a ton of water, and have it just stored somewhere. So you can't buy it ahead of time. You can't put a long-term contract in place, because if there's no water, it doesn't really matter what your contract says on a piece of paper. If there's no water, there's no water. So the mitigation strategies for that are a little bit more complicated and difficult. Is where do we manufacture in the future? Starts becoming a long-term strategy. Is where can we put sites where there's water and not have this risk, knowing it's going to get worse and worse. So we try, work to get better, but it's going to get worse before it gets better. So
okay, thank you. Chris, do any of your suppliers use water?
Yeah, right. Same problems on our end. Not necessarily for us specifically, but yeah, I mean, it's true. The arid climate, it's already hard to grow certain things that the consumers want without that water. I think for us as the restaurant and the storytellers of these farmers, it is our job to educate our diners and our guests about the practices that certain farmers are looking at. Culture or just drip systems within greenhouses, being a little bit more conscious of it, and they are. And for them, it's an economic thing and availability of water in the short term, but they are also committed to it. And so we try to prop them up as best we can. It's fires as well out here, right? And in California. But for just as an example, there's a family-owned company in Bellevue, Idaho, that they are generational wheat rows, and wheat is not the sexiest of ingredients, but is incredibly important to the food system. And they are growing their own heirloom wheats that are drought tolerant, and they're starting to implement all of their products to be as such. They mill the flour in their own facility and they deliver it out. So they're a small thing, but they're very thoughtful about it, and they're looking far into the future of how the climate and the land in Idaho is going to change. So that's also temperature resistant, and again, low water. So we use as much of it as we can, and we flash it out to our guests. And it's like, God, these guys are just talking about flour again, but it is important for us, and that's kind of our jobs.
Great. Yeah, and I think that the role of some companies in the supply chain is being sort of the storytellers for the supply chain. It's kind of an interesting thing that I'd never really thought about before. Barb, let's talk a little bit about climate change.
Yeah, so the issue of climate change is hugely important to Idaho National Lab, and in fact, our biggest mission statement is to the big picture statement that we repeat to ourselves every day is that we are here to change our nation's energy future. And by changing the energy future for the nation, we hope to really have an impact on the carbon net zero problem that we're addressing, whether it's through all of the net zero type electricity generators such as nuclear, solar, wind. We're developing more and better technologies to support those efforts so that we can actually achieve this goal of carbon net zero. But so INL is very, very involved in that. One of the things that I would say, though, in terms of how the climate change transitions that we're all going through right now, we're all trying to figure out how to improve upon the challenge of climate change, is the regulation that's going to be rolling down our way. Any company, any industry that's doing business with the federal government is going to start to see more and more regulation in this regard. And I think that that's a good thing for sure, but it's also going to impact how we analyze the suppliers in our chain or in our net of suppliers, because they would have to be regulatorily compliant if we were to use them as a lab, for
Yeah.
example.
Okay.
And so that's just another way to knock out a few suppliers that we have so little of, right?
Right.
So it's gonna impact us for sure.
Okay, thank you.
yeah, so-
I need to cut you
Yeah,
off because
that's right.
we want to leave a little bit of time for Q&A here. And let's just go ahead and take a couple of questions. I'm sure there's some out there. Brittany, I'm not sure exactly what the logistics are for doing this.
There's a
raise
couple
their
of
hand.
options. You're welcome
Okay.
to put your question in the chat and Tom or I can read it.
Yeah.
Or you could raise your hand, which I believe you find in the reactions button. There's a raise hand and then we can call on you if you would like to verbalize your question.
Okay, John Hannian.
Yeah, hi. John Hannian, Idaho Office of Emergency Management. I'm the Public-Private Partnership Program Manager out here. So I'm essentially, that's a long title, and all it means is I'm the liaison between this agency and the private sector. And I want to first just applaud you all for having this conversation, because as an emergency manager and as we try as an agency and as a state to get our arms around resiliency, these are the types of conversations that are truly, I think, important. And I want to go back to something that Barb mentioned, because we saw during COVID, we were working a lot of these issues in our own silos and stovepipes. And so it became pretty apparent quickly that we needed to bring more people into the room, and especially the private sector. So one of the things we're trying to do, we're developing a dashboard, a platform, which we call our Public-Private Partnership Platform, or known as the P4, to bring the private sector into the same work environment as our emergency managers are trying to work the problem. We're finding out, and a big part of resiliency is leaning into the anticipating what's coming around the bend, so that we can anticipate. A great example of that was with PPE. Trying to anticipate what our needs were going to be, so that we were well ahead of the curve on that. And we saw that certainly with the grocery sector. I was happy to see my partner and colleague Don Lynn from Albertsons, because we, as we started going along, it was very apparent that each of the states were working the problem separately, but we were dealing with distribution centers that each of us, I think, could have saved quite a bit of time had we had that space. And so I don't know that I really have a question. I just wanted to say that these kind of conversations are just super important.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. I think, this whole sort of discipline of supply resilience and supply risk management, it's kind of flown under the radar, by and large. And people like you had no reason to really be aware of it until the past couple of years. And it's a fairly new area, even for cutting edge companies. Let's see, Don from Albertsons actually has his hand up. Don Lynn.
Yeah, and not because John did that. And Tom, I'll just do a friendly jab that Albertsons companies did respond to Katrina also. For those of you not familiar with Albertsons, we are the second largest grocer in the US. So there are local issues and there are national issues. And I look forward with working with John, because wow, what a panel today. You all had great things. First off, I want to try the pepper also, just myself. But just like Rick, we can't grow food without water. We can't do food prep without water. Water, I mean, the lifeblood of everything that we do. So that certainly should be on the top of the list. Not a question, but wanted to kind of add the challenge that I see, and I'm going to just speak to the grocery sector, is that when you start looking, and I love the term network for the supply chain as a network, where there's competitive advantage, competitive intelligence, and very slim margins, keeps us away from the conversation. And one thing, if nothing else, that COVID taught us, I mean, I'm talking to Walmart, I'm talking to CNS, I'm talking to food people that I would have never before, and said, what are our common areas that we can go work together because we have a shared responsibility for an area. And where it becomes a competition and all that, we need to set that aside. But we need to really address that and realize that, yeah, that it needs to be addressed, but what are the forums that we can put there so that we can work together, and especially to support the planet that we all depend on. So thanks again, tremendous. Just loved everybody's comment.
Well, thank you and John for the compliments. I know we all appreciate it. Again, I mentioned the area of humanitarian logistics, which is kind of how you respond. You being Albertsons and not really Walmart, we don't care about those guys. Really overlaps a lot with this idea of supply chain resilience, kind of two different sides of kind of a similar coin. Other questions? I don't see any other hands up, Brittany. Brittany, do you have any thoughts like to kind of conclude with? If not, I'll probably pick on Stephen.
Well, I would just say this has been super interesting, and I really appreciate all the panelists being here. And I know that just looking at the audience, we have a lot of folks that I haven't met before, so I'm really pleased to see that this attracted some new folks to our community engagement events. I did put a link to the INL IROC Resilience Optimization Center, so to learn a little bit more about what INL is doing in the state in case anybody was interested. And Chris, I do have your menu pulled up, so I plan to visit your restaurant.
We all do.
So, but thank you all. And yeah, if there's any more questions from the audience.
Okay, Stephen, how's all this going to look different in 5 to 10 years?
Boy.
In 1 minute or less.
Yeah, I love being asked to prognosticate on things that change, that change every 5 seconds. Information acquisition is going to speed up so rapidly that decision making is going to hopefully catch up to it, or at least get close. So my guess is the pace at which we make decisions with computer-aided technology and information being that much easier to access should help decision making. At the same time, it's going to open up vulnerabilities, because if we get that information, a malicious actor can get that information and cause a disruption to the power grid and interrupt continuity of supply. So speed is my guess is the thing that's going to change.
Thank you.
Can I add, Thomas, real quick, to exactly what Stephen was saying in terms of 5 to 10 years, what we're going to see, which I really hope, this is my hopeful prediction, is that the marriage between AI and risk analysts, people, right, will become much more apparently intertwined to all of us, because there's a lot of people that mistakenly believe that you can just run AI programs and you're good. And I think that what the future will be a very, very good marriage of some of the BSU graduates, hopefully, that you are getting out there, who will analyze data in a way, who will understand what the AI process is doing for you and what it's not doing for you, because that can be a real big gap. A lot of people think AI is doing something it's not. So understanding that universe, but then also where AI, I believe, is going to change tremendously, and I really look forward to this, is that AI algorithms are going to start to evaluate this idea of what's truthful information on the internet and what's false information. Right now, we don't have a good bead on that, and I think that's a really good area for AI to work on percentages of whether or not this is disinformation or this is solid information, because that evaluation is really only being done on an ad hoc basis. And I think that goes to the idea of creating analytical tradecraft and making sure that the information we're making these risk evaluations on is reliable. So I think that that's very, there's a lot of room for improvement on that.
Okay, thank you.
I've seen Terminator, though. I don't know if we want to have that marriage between AI and people.
Minority Report, Minority Report, right? That's the movie.
Okay, we may even have some big data people or computer scientists on the call here. I wouldn't be surprised if we did. So big flag to you guys. Something interesting to work on. I'd like to thank all the panelists. And it's been fascinating for me getting to know you guys and learn a little bit more about you. And I think good session for everybody. Thanks for everybody that showed up. I selfishly posted a link to the Boise State supply chain program there, College of Business and Economics, ITSCM, if anybody wants to talk more. And of course, you know how to get a hold of the Hazard and Climate Change Resilience Institute because you're here, right? So let's talk. Brittany, hand up.
Yeah, sorry, there was one more question that came in.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
Oh, it's okay. So it was actually on Don Lynn's question. If competition between grocery outlets hurts the supply chain, how do you lower the temperature and get everyone to work together?
Don,
that could be for the panelists. It could be for Don.
Don may have dropped off.
No,
no, there's Don. Okay.
No,
yeah,
I'm
okay.
here to the
Go
end.
ahead, Don,
Yeah,
please.
you know, the way you do is that you find what are those common issues that you work on, and you work on them together. And it's kind of like you band together and throw rocks at, you know, your enemy and tackle that problem and forget the other stuff. You know, we purposed during COVID, we're not in this for a competitive advantage. We are here for the good of the communities. And I think it's the discussions and the fostering of that really does it. And that's where we're approaching it right now.
Thank you. I think in most supply chains, we find that, you know, there's areas where competitors need to cooperate and where cooperators need to compete. And it's always, you know, that there's a balance. Okay, well, thank you. Thanks, everybody. Last words, Brittany, thumbs up.
Thank you, everybody, for being here. I'm struggling with the mute button.
We all are.
Really appreciate your time. It's super interesting. So.
Thanks,
thank
everybody.
you, Tom.
Thank
you
you.
for
All right.
organizing
Tom,
this.
great job.
Thanks to everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.